Hey, folks. Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast live stream. It's great to be back with you live. We've had a pretty good run here, right? In recent weeks, where we've been faithfully live with you, which is always great. And I'm just pulling up the actual channel right now so I can see all of your comments. Apologies. Give me 1 second. I want to see what everyone is saying. And I know we have a lively live chat. Superfood. And here it is. I got you all now. I see Chicago already. Someone from Chicago says he's now in Tennessee. Tyler P., welcome. Someone from Brazil. We will have people from all over the world by the time we are done today. Again, great to be with you. This is the Watchman Newscast live stream. We're going till 5 p.m. Eastern time, a full hour with you all live. And we really want you to bring your questions for our Q&A session, folks. That is very important, because probably the last 15 to 18 minutes of this newscast, we will be taking your questions. We've got a lot to talk about. You may have seen the title of this newscast today, Iran. Here's the title, if you didn't see it. The theme of this live stream, Iran, Russia, and China, major moves in 2023, a wars and rumors of war update, prophetic implications. With everything we're seeing with these chess pieces moving on the board, what do you think? I want you to weigh in. Leave a comment here. Ask a question, of course. I want everyone to weigh in. And what do you think? Hey, we're a month in. That's why I thought it'd be a good time to do this. We're a month into 2023. Hard to believe, right? How time flies. But we are indeed a month into this new year. What do you see this year as? What I mean by that is, do you see this as kind of a culmination year where this is where everything explodes and everything hits the fan? Or is this still kind of a setting things up kind of year in 2023 for greater prophetic events in 2024, 2025, perhaps beyond, if we get that far? What do you think? What do you see 2023 as we are a month into this new year? What are your thoughts on this so far? Would love to get those. And if you have not subscribed, by the way, I assume if you're here on a live stream, we'll have thousands of people with us from all around the world by the time we are done. But I assume if you're here on a live stream, you're kind of the special forces of the Watchman News channel, the watchmen and women on the wall, and you've probably subscribed. But if you haven't, be sure to click the subscribe button, click the notification bell, give us a thumbs up. And that helps us to get the message out for such a time as this. And folks, there's a lot to talk about. Let's dig into it. If you've been watching the newscast this week, big themes so far: Iran-Russia alliance and the implications for Israel. We've got a breaking news update on that front. Now, yesterday on a newscast that already has well over 100,000 views, we posted it about 24 hours ago. Russia issued what I would call a veiled threat to Israel and the United States, for that matter. I'll expound on that again in a minute in case you missed yesterday's newscast. And if you do, hey, check it out here on our archives under newscast on our homepage. But folks, an update there. New information out of Moscow. And I'm going to quote directly from the Times of Israel, which is reporting this. And here's the headline: Moscow warns Israel against supplying any arms to Ukraine. Folks, I knew this was coming. It wasn't hard to see. Not just me. Anyone really who's following this closely could see this coming. We reported on the newscast about 2 weeks ago. Again, check it out in our archives. That Israel's foreign minister, Eli Cohen, the brand new Israeli foreign minister, in a conversation with his Ukrainian counterpart, said, hey, I am going to visit Ukraine. He would be the highest ranking Israeli official to visit Ukraine since the war broke out nearly 1 year ago. And what I shared on the newscast was Russia is not going to be very happy about this. Israel has kind of straddled that line for the past year and not gone too far into one direction or the other. A very delicate dance for Israel. And the whole reason for that, as we've shared with you in the newscast many times, is Israel wants to retain freedom of movement to strike Iran in Syria. That's the bottom line. And Russia is in Syria right now, aligned with Iran and Hezbollah. So Israel is concerned that if they get on, I guess you would say, the bad side of Vladimir Putin, then Russia is all of a sudden going to say in Syria, enough is enough, Israel, no more, we're closing the skies. And that's the concern, folks. That gets down to the very crux of it. But Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, gave an interview to CNN yesterday. I'm not sure why, but he did. Thankfully, we interviewed him here on the Watchman about a month ago, so I can't complain. But you know, when you're going on CNN, you're going into hostile territory, but he can handle it. He's one of the great debaters and speakers and minds of our time. But I just kind of cringe sometimes because, you know, if you're a conservative who's stepping into CNN or the BBC or New York Times, Washington Post, the usual suspects, the coverage generally isn't going to be very favorable. But nonetheless, Bibi went on CNN and he made some interesting comments about Ukraine, saying, number one, he would be, and I'll get to the Russian response in a minute, but some backdrop for you. Number one, he would be open to playing a mediator role between Russia and Ukraine. Now, Naftali Bennett, one of his predecessors, besides Yair Lapid, but Bennett last year tried to play that mediator role as well. It didn't really have much success with it. He visited Moscow. He talked to Ukrainian leaders as well. Didn't really go anywhere. Bibi, of course, is someone who seems to have the respect of Vladimir Putin. They've known each other for some 24 years. Bibi has visited Moscow on a regular basis to meet with Putin. And the main reason he's going there, folks, is to maintain what I just mentioned a minute ago, that deconfliction strategy. That's what Israel and Russia call it, the deconfliction mechanism, meaning if Israel's going into Syria to strike Iran, Hezbollah, they give Russia a heads up so there's no conflict, deconfliction. Bibi is going to Russia on a regular basis, at least he was during his last go-round as prime minister, to continue to ease any potential tensions with Putin and make sure things go on as they've been going on. So he talked about playing that mediator role yesterday, number one. And look, Bibi is a great statesman. I don't think it's an understatement to say that. He is a great statesman, no doubt. But that's a tough road to hoe, as they say, between Russia and Ukraine right now and dealing with Vladimir Putin. Secondly, and this really caught Russia's attention, Netanyahu said, okay, we are sending humanitarian aid to Ukraine, but we're looking at, and I'm paraphrasing him here, but this is the essence of what he said, we're looking at perhaps sending other kinds of aid as well. Now, Israel has resisted calls from Ukraine to send the Iron Dome missile defense system and other kind of advanced weaponry to Ukraine. They've also apparently resisted calls from the U.S. to send some advanced weaponry to Ukraine. Again, Israel is saying, you know what? Would love to. My heart is with you. But if we do that, we are putting our neck out there and making Russia very angry. And if we make Russia very angry, the skies over Syria may close. We won't have freedom of movement. And if that happens, Iran and Hezbollah and their various terrorist proxies all of a sudden have the freedom to establish a beachhead at our northern doorstep, a beachhead they've been working to establish for over a decade. Israel says we can't have it. Now, I know we'll have commenters, and certainly I agree, saying Israel should not be concerned about anyone. I don't say that Israel should. I don't agree that Israel shouldn't be concerned in the natural. But ultimately, most of our viewers will say, hey, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Israel, is in Israel's corner. He laughs at Israel's enemies. We know how the script ends. We know how the war of Gog and Magog plays out. Israel is victorious. Why are they even concerned about this? Be bold and say, hey, Russia, we're doing what we need to do. And by the way, Bibi will probably do that regardless, whether it angers Russia or not. He's going to do it. But what I'm saying is, two things here. Number one, yes, the God of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. He is the ultimate protector of the land of Israel. But secondly, also, I'm saying that Bibi is going to do what he needs to do. But when it comes to the faith factor, a lot of Israel's leaders are thinking of things in the natural, folks. Not all of them, and God bless them, but not all of them see things on a deeper spiritual level right now. At this point in the modern state of Israel's history, the Bible says that's going to change. God's going to pour out his spirit on the people of Israel. It's going to be amazing what's going to happen. But right now, many are looking at it purely in the natural. Hey, I take you back to 1967. In the run-up to the Six-Day War, Israelis were digging graves before that war. They thought it was going to be a massacre. You had Egyptian and Syrian and Jordanian armies massing on Israel's borders. And talk about a God thing and how God intervenes on the behalf of his land and his people. The Six-Day War can only be described as absolutely miraculous. The victory that Israel won there, a preemptive, it was over in 6 days. It was over really on the first or second day. I forget which day that was, when Israel completely destroyed Egypt's air force on the ground in the morning while the Egyptians were sitting there sipping their morning coffee. That's literally what happened. But I say all this to say, before that war, which was a great triumph for Israel, a prophetic, massive, global, regional game changer, before that war, folks, Israelis were not feeling very confident, many of them. As I said, they're actually digging graves, anticipating a massacre and a lot of casualties. Thank God that never happened. But so you get a window, and look, there are many Israelis. By the way, don't get the wrong picture. I'm in Israel all the time. Some of my dearest friends in the world live in the land of Israel and have a steadfast faith in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And they're not worried. They're not concerned. But in the natural, many look at things in the natural and say, oh, my word, what are we going to do? Folks, it's kind of human nature in many ways, right? So we do see that. That's why I preface the Russia conversation by saying that, because many times, and rightly so, our commenters will say Israel has the ultimate ally. Forget the United States, forget it. Forget the UAE, Bahrain. Israel's got God Almighty in their corner. Amen. But many Israelis not only many Israelis, many people in every country get worried, get concerned, and look at things in the natural. And in many cases, as we all know, I think wherever you live in the world, many times today it seems our political leaders certainly look at things in the natural. They're not seeing the bigger spiritual picture. I'm not saying in every case, but I would wager to say in 2023, in most cases, political leaders around the world are seeing things strictly in the natural and not in God's economy. So I preface the Russia conversation because I know people are going to say there's a spirit of fear in Israel. Why the fear? Hey, look at the Bible. Look at someone like Gideon, for instance. Sometimes you got to put your fleece out a little bit, but eventually things work out when God is in your corner. And in this Russia conversation, it's going to get dicey. I'm telling you right now. And here's an example of that today. And by the way, the theme again, Iran, Russia, and China. We're going to talk Iran, a little bit about China. What is the Secretary-General of NATO warning the world about when it comes to China? You're going to want to hear that as well. I've called Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea the Gathering Storm Coalition. It's a gathering storm. They're aligned. They have far-flung ideologies, really. I mean, Iran, radical jihadi Islamists of the Shia stripe. You have Russia and Vladimir Putin, who is clearly not a jihadi. He's not a communist. He's a dictator with expansionist, larger aims to establish a greater Russia once again and kind of reestablish the Soviet Union, at least geographically, territorially. You have China, which is a communist regime, which has been also, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the current Chinese leadership is bent on world domination. This isn't a James Bond movie. I know that verbiage might sound like that, but literally, this regime in Beijing wants to clearly supplant the United States, supplant every Western power, and be the top dog in the world. And folks, that's not good on a lot of levels because that's a totalitarian, atheistic regime. Then you have Iran. Oh, I'm sorry, we mentioned Iran. You have North Korea, which is a Stalinist hermit kingdom, completely isolated, shut off, atheistic, the world's worst persecutor of Christians. So there are differences there ideologically in this Gathering Storm coalition, but what do they have in common? All four of these players are fiercely anti-Western, no doubt. At least two of them, Iran and North Korea, are viciously anti-Israel. A third, Russia, I believe, is heading for a conflict with Israel in the diplomatic realm at first. I believe eventually, and we can talk about this, and we have talked about it, I look at the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, and I look at the war of Gog and Magog. Funny name, I know, but I believe that Russia will very likely be the one who leads what Ezekiel calls a latter days, Latter, latter days coalition against Israel. Now, that coalition doesn't get very far. They meet their demise on the mountains of Israel, but nonetheless, I believe tough times are coming for the Russia-Israel relationship. Today, Moscow warns Israel against supplying any arms to Ukraine. I apologize for the tangent. I'm circling back to this article now. Here is what spokeswoman Maria Zakharova, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, who's had a lot of very anti-Israel statements over the past year that we've chronicled here on the newscast. Here is what she said in the wake of Bibi's comments that I mentioned on CNN. We say that all countries that supply weapons to Ukraine should understand that we will consider these weapons to be legitimate targets for Russia's armed forces. Okay, that's one thing. If Israel's supplying weapons and the weapons are taken out, that's one thing. No Israelis are being harmed. Then she says, any attempts implemented or even unrealized, but announced for the supply of additional new weapons lead, follow me here, and this kind of a convoluted statement, any attempt, even a suggested attempt, she's saying, that you're going to supply weapons to Ukraine will lead to an escalation of this crisis. And everyone should be aware of this. Don't send the weapons, she's saying to Israel, and not naming Israel. Well, she did in her statement. Yeah, it was a response to Bibi. So yes, this is specifically talking to Israel. The plot thickens, folks. What do you all think? Considering the Syria situation, do you believe that Israel should send weapons to Ukraine? I think it's a very slippery slope. I think Israel has been playing it pretty smart, to be honest with you. I know there's relentless world pressure, especially from the West and NATO, to be, go all in and supply Ukraine with weapons. Folks, I don't know if that's the smartest thing for Israel, to say the least, because you will have an angry Russian hornet's nest at your border in Syria. And yes, I know God is in control, but why even have that confrontation if you can avoid it? Eventually, you're not going to be able to avoid it, by the way. It is coming eventually, no matter what you do. But for now, Israel's got other issues, folks. Iran's nuclear program, Hamas, Hezbollah, a host of issues it's dealing with, a new government that just came into power about a month ago. So what they're thinking is the last thing we need right now is a showdown with Russia, which basically we share a border with. Thousands of Russian troops are in Syria. And by the way, folks, they're not going anywhere. Those Russian troops are there to stay. And another thing I'll say about Israel, and this applies to every nation in the world, quite frankly, my nation, the United States, your nation, wherever you live. Again, we have people from 6 continents. We've also got a group of penguins reportedly in Antarctica feverishly working their devices and watching on laptops there in an igloo. So we've got people all over the world watching us right now. No matter where you are, I would argue that your leadership should put your country's interest first. It's not being selfish. It's being common sense. So Israel, while it certainly doesn't like what Russia is doing in Ukraine, Israel has to weigh a lot of factors here, folks. And it's saying, you know what? At the end of the day, I care about Ukraine, but I care more about my land, my nation, and my people. That's not meant to sound harsh. It's a fact. Any leader of a nation state should put the interest of that nation state first. Not isolate itself from the world. Certainly not. Have great relationships, alliances around the world. Get involved when you need to get involved. But there are many factors at times where you have to put your nation's interest first. And that's called being a nationalist and not a globalist. And that's where I stand. So there's a lot of considerations here, needless to say. And I think Israel is, look, they're walking a fine line. They're trying to be shrewd here and do the right thing. But ultimately, folks, this is going to be unavoidable, a conflict with Russia. And not necessarily over Israel's stance in Ukraine. Here's some information that we covered on yesterday's newscast, and I want to break it down for you again if you missed that. We had the warning today, yesterday, from the Jerusalem Post, and we discussed this on the newscast. Russia sends veiled threat to Israel and the U.S. over the Iranian weapons depot blast. What is the Iranian weapons depot blast? We talked about it. Occurred last Saturday night. I believe that was January 28th. Israel, reportedly, Israeli drones, at least 3, targeted an Iranian weapons factory in the city of Isfahan in central Iran. Apparently targeted very successfully. We don't know what was in there. Was it drones, missiles, nuclear materials? We're not sure. But this drone strike seems to have been a success. Russia, and then the next day, by the way, Israel struck an Iranian weapons convoy that was traveling near the Iraq-Syria border. That was no doubt headed on its way to Syria or Lebanon. Russia was none too happy about this. And here were the comments from Russia's foreign ministry. If you missed the newscast yesterday, you're going to want to hear this. Talk about the collision course we're on between Moscow and Jerusalem. The Russian foreign ministry said of this Iran drone strike on Monday, quote, "We strongly condemn any provocative efforts that have the potential to provoke an uncontrolled escalation of tensions in a region that's far from being peaceful as it is." That's the first part of the statement. It gets really juicy after that. But let me just say, Russia talking about being provocative and uncontrolled escalations of tensions and being an impediment to peace. Russia talking about another nation being that. Do we need to review the events of the past 11 months? Interesting. He goes on to say, the foreign ministry, such destructive actions could have unpredictable consequences for peace and stability in the Middle East. This is where it gets really interesting, folks. Listen closely. This is from the Russian foreign ministry. That has to be understood by the organizers of the brazen raid. It was brazen. Their backers and those who are gloating over the issue. Get this. Holding on to the futile hope for the weakening of Iran. Now, again, if you missed yesterday's newscast, we put that up in a graphic. You can read it yourself on screen. Go to yesterday was January 31st. Just go to the archives on the homepage under newscast. Boom, click on it. We put the entire quote up in a graphic. We can't do that on a live stream because on live streams for now, we're just coming to you from the laptop. Pardon me. So you'll want to see that full quote pulled up, but let me just read the end of it again. The organizers, Israel, of the brazen raid, brazen? Their backers, the United States, and those who are gloating over it. And the last part really, really slayed me. Holding on to the futile hope for the weakening of Iran. That last part, the futile hope for weakening Iran. Wow. Folks, that sounds like a statement from the office of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. The kind of statements we get from the Iranian regime all the time. Mighty Iran will triumph over the Zionist entity. We get that kind of craziness all the time. That statement sounds like it was written by the office of the supreme leader of Iran. Yet it came from the foreign ministry of Russia in Moscow. That's where we're at. And by the way, the timing, the organizers of the raid and their backers, quote unquote, The Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, was in Israel this week, as was the CIA Director, William Burns. Coincidental timing? What do you think? Did they know? You have to think that perhaps they had a heads up or fair warning from Israel. Was there a U.S. hand in this drone strike? Is that beyond the realm of possibility? We reported here in the newscast last week that Iran, or about a week and a half ago, that Iran sent a group of drones against a U.S. base in Syria. Perhaps the U.S. is saying, hey, wait a minute, tit for tat here. Now, the Biden administration, let me preface it by saying, has not exactly taken a hard line against the Iranian regime. We could talk about that all day long. But perhaps there was some coordination. Again, the timing of top U.S. officials in Israel as this all unfolds, back-to-back strikes, first in Isfahan, then against that convoy along the Iraq-Syria border. Very interesting, the timing. So Russia made sure in that statement to kind of rope the United States into that as well with the term backers. But look, folks, what we have here, and this is why I say the collision course, at first diplomatic, between Israel and Russia, I believe it's unavoidable, and not over Ukraine. Now, for the West, it's a Ukraine thing. The West looks at Iran right now and says, Iran, you're cracking the skulls of your own protesters in the streets. We've reported on that here in the newscast, the complete butchery going on against the Iranian people from this regime. By the way, the Iranian people are the main victims of this regime. We love the Iranian people. They've been the victims of this regime for over 43 years now. But the main reason for the West is the drone program, with Iran sending, speaking of drones, some 2,000 attack drones to Russia to be used in Ukraine, arming Russia, and also soon with ballistic missiles reportedly. That, folks, that Russia, not Ukraine. That's why NATO is furious at Iran, and for good reason. But the Iran-Russia alliance is what's going to make Israel's collision course with Russia unavoidable. Folks, think about it. Russia right now is openly aligned with Israel's greatest enemies, proudly aligned with Iran. You heard that statement. Proudly and fiercely, I'd even say, aligned with the Iranian regime. You may say, well, it's a marriage of convenience. It's a marriage nonetheless. I know they don't share the same ideology, and at the end of the day, they may not be very fond of each other, but you know what? Man, these are two essentially pariah states right now, and they're coming together closer and closer. The old adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They share a lot of enemies. Yeah, they have differences, serious differences between them, but they share a lot of enemies, a lot of common anti-Western interests. So if Russia is aligned with Israel's greatest enemies, I'm talking the Assad regime in Syria, which is still technically in a state of war with Israel. I'm talking Iran, which wants to wipe Israel off the map and is actively taking steps to try to make that a reality. I'm talking Hezbollah. Russian soldiers are openly shoulder to shoulder with Iran and Hezbollah in the battlefields of Syria and with Assad's soldiers as well. I'm talking Hamas, which has sent delegations to Moscow, which were greeted warmly by representatives of Vladimir Putin's regime. If Russia is aligned with your greatest enemies and is at your doorstep, how long do you think you're going to be able to avoid conflict with that country? Add to it this fact. Who knows what the term quid pro quo means? I mentioned Iran equipping Russia with drones and quite possibly ballistic missiles in the near future. Iran says, what are you going to give us in return? Do you really think the Iranian regime is doing this out of the goodness of their hearts? No. What's in it for us? Well, one hint is that by the month of March, about a month from now, Russia reportedly will send fighter jets to Iran. But the other piece to this, I believe, is that Iranian leaders are imploring Russia, I'm sure, to stop Israel's freedom of movement in Syria. You have to think that Iran is saying, hey, we're helping you. We're getting you out of a bind in Ukraine. We're arming you. Now you have to help us. Quid pro quo. What do we get in return? And Russia, the way you can help us is by shutting the skies over Syria and not allowing the Zionist entity to operate against us anymore. And Iran could take it further and say, this is embarrassing for Russia. We're your allies. Yet you're letting the Zionists bomb us right under your noses in Syria? They could appeal to Russia's pride. And Russia could say, Israel's getting too big for its britches. Folks, this is entirely possible. And that is why Israel has not gone all in behind Ukraine, because they know this is entirely possible. Read Bibi's book, Netanyahu's book, Bibi, My Story. Towards the end of the book, there is an excerpt that's very enlightening. There was a parade in Moscow about 4 years ago, I believe, 4 or 5 years ago, 5 years ago, 2018, because it was commemorating the 100-year anniversary of the end of World War I. Bibi was one of only 2 world leaders invited. And he met with Putin, and he said that he looked at the military hardware that was on display during this Russian military parade, and Bibi made a mental note and said, you know what? We need to be careful in Syria. We don't want to stir this hornet's nest. And that's been the thinking behind Israel's moves when it comes to Russia, Ukraine. You can agree, you can disagree. Like I said earlier, I think it's wise for every nation to put their interest first, not in a cold-hearted, selfish way. But if certain moves are really going to jeopardize your best interests, you might have to say, you know what? This one I need to sit out. And Israel has tried to straddle that line over the past year. And certainly NATO is all in, obviously, behind Ukraine in that war. I know there's various thoughts about that as well. I'm very active here on the comments. So why does Israel need to throw its hat in the ring as well when it's got the Russian behemoth on its border breathing down its neck? And when Israel has vital existential security concerns in Syria. Look, if those skies are shut, and again, Netanyahu won't allow that to happen. He will do what he needs to do. He's not going to back down. He's not going to back down to Vladimir Putin. He's going to say, Vladimir, I'm sorry, and we don't want to be in a dogfight in midair over Syria with your fighter jets. It's happened before, by the way, over the skies of Egypt in the late 60s, early 70s, Soviet fighter jets and Israeli fighter jets, and the Israeli fighter jets fared quite well. Remember, the Soviet Union Egypt was a client state of the Soviet Union in those days, until Sadat kicked the Soviets out in the early 70s. But Iran is trying to transit, who knows if they try and transit any kind of nuclear materials into Syria, but certainly they are trying to transit. There's threats here, folks. 1A is the nuclear program of Iran. 1B is Iran's precision-guided missile program, PGM for short. They do exactly what the name says. They are designed to hit the target with greater accuracy and greater precision. That's a complete red line for Israel. And that is the main reason Israel has conducted so many strikes in Syria, targeting that shipments of precision-guided missile parts that are on their way to southern Lebanon to go into the hands of Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah already has some 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at every inch of Israel. The precision-guided missiles, though, would be an absolute game changer, and Israel knows it. Let's take a stop. Let me stop and take a breath real quick and say hello to everyone. We've got people from around the world with us, thousands with us watching right now. This is awesome. We've got questions coming in. Quick reminders, as we're a little past the halfway point here of this live stream, send the questions, number one. Number two, on the chat, keep it respectful to each other in particular. No craziness, no personal insults on the chat, or you will be blocked. Any trolls, any insulters, any people getting nasty on there, you're out of here. We're having a good give and take here. Everyone's enjoying themselves. It's everyone together, many brothers and sisters in Christ here, many not, but you're also welcome as well. But this is a Christian channel, and we have certain standards here. And one standard is you're not going to attack people in the chat. We ain't having that, as we would say in Philly, where I grew up. By the way, if you do want my Super Bowl prediction, you might be able to guess it right here, but I'm saying 31-24 Eagles. Kansas City's tough. Patrick Mahomes, tough, although he's a little hobbled right now. Andy Reid, obviously, was Philly's coach for 14 years. Have a soft spot in my heart for him. But 31-24 Eagles, what do you all think? Give me your predictions in the chat. By the way, Tom Brady, will he stay retired now? Give me that prediction as well. But it's kind of fun to talk sports once in a while and mix it up. It's kind of an escape from rockets and bombs, right? So give me your predictions there. I'd love to hear them. And don't pick the Eagles just because I'm from Philly and you're trying to get on my good side. Just kidding. It's going to be a great game. Kansas City's tough. We shall see. But quick reminders, newscast every day, Monday through Friday and Saturday as well. Monday through Saturday, sometimes on Sunday, depending on the news cycle. Now, some people say, why are you filming on Sunday? You should be at church. Many times a Sunday video, it can be filmed on Saturday, unless it's breaking news. So sometimes on Sunday, but certainly every day, Monday through Saturday, we will have a post for you. On Saturday, sometimes it will be what's called a YouTube short. Have you guys seen these on the channel? They're becoming pretty popular now on YouTube. Maybe it's 45, 50-second clip, a short clip, but they're doing very well. And people in this short attention span society that we live in right now, people seem to like these short clips, especially younger folks. I'm going for an hour here on the live stream, but that's an exception to the rule, I guess. We don't do this all the time, but it is fun when we do it. So give us a subscribe as we move on here. We'd love to have you with us as watchmen and women on the wall if you like what you're hearing for such a time as this. And also, my team is reminding me, mention the other social media platforms. Now, Instagram is one in particular that we really want to build up. You can follow us at Erick.Stakelbeck on Instagram, Erick.Stakelbeck. We'd love if you could join us there. We're on Facebook as well and Twitter. You're going to see a lot more activity on those other platforms from us in 2023. So join us there as well. We've got fresh content all over the place. Certainly a lot to talk about. We talked Russia, Iran. We might get the questions early today. And that's a good thing, right? I do want to mention China, though, before we do. NATO's Secretary-General said yesterday what we've been saying here in the newscast for months, that China is watching what's happening in Ukraine very closely. As China has designs on Taiwan, and China is planning things vis-a-vis Taiwan, they're watching a few things in Russia. And NATO Secretary-General pointed this out rightly. They're watching a few things. Number one, what's the world's reaction? I mentioned earlier, Russia is essentially a pariah state now because of the invasion. You might say, you're wrong. Look, Russia right now, its allies, I named them, China, Iran, North Korea, Belarus, Venezuela. The one democracy that's still doing business with Russia is India. And that's, again, a long-standing relationship stretching back to the Soviet days. India and the Soviet Union also had a close relationship. But Vlad needs friends right now. And Russia is isolated in many ways. The relationship with the West is completely in tatters. So Russia isolated. So China's watching that. How bad will the isolation get? Will we be a pariah state? I think China's in a different situation, though, folks, because they have their finger in the pie around the world. In many nations' economies, they're doing business with China. They're in debt to China, certainly when it comes to the United States. That's one thing China's watching. What will be the repercussions? What's the fallout for us, China says. Secondly, they're watching Ukraine's resistance. How fiercely will Ukraine resist? Now, Vladimir Putin, it's pretty clear, and the Russian brass, it seems that essentially they expected Ukraine to roll over. And the tanks are going to come in Kyiv, and that's that. It seems that's what they thought. That didn't happen. So China is thinking, how will Taiwan react? How will Taiwan resist us? And clearly the elephant in the room here, totally different situation in terms of Ukraine is a landlocked, other than the Black Sea, a landlocked country, and Taiwan's an island. So clearly, from a military sense, and I'm not a military strategist, but from a military sense, and we've got a lot of ex-military, perhaps current military on the live stream with us now, how does China go about that? It seems like it's largely a naval operation and an aerial operation, obviously, in Taiwan. We hope it never happens, but we are clear-eyed enough to know that certainly that's China's goal. They consider Taiwan to be part of the Chinese mainland. And the communist regime in Beijing says, hey, Taiwan is part of Greater China, and that's that. And eventually, we're going to claim what is ours. Folks, that's how they're looking at it. And it's wise to acknowledge that fact and prepare for it. That day is coming. And the big question I have is when. That's a question everyone has. But when in this regard? Did China before plan, you know what? We're going to continue to build up, and we've reported here in the newscast, they're building up their nuclear arsenal, their Navy especially, their ballistic missile arsenal in a massive way. Hypersonic missiles now testing. Massive military buildup. Some say unprecedented since World War II. That's how big this Chinese buildup is. It's not for nothing. Clearly, they have larger plans, but they may have been saying before, say, Joe Biden took office, before, say, America withdrew from Afghanistan in such disastrous fashion, before Russia invaded Ukraine. Perhaps back then, China was saying 2027. That's the time we're going to do it, or 2026. That is when we'll move on Taiwan. We'll be at the point then militarily where we're ready and we can go. Perhaps China now is saying, you know what? There's weak leadership in Washington, D.C. right now, and I mean weak. What if and there's an election in 2024. Who knows what's going to happen? There's been a lot of issues with elections here in the United States over the past few years, but perhaps a hawkish conservative comes to power who's going to take a hard line on China. As soon as January 2025, they'd be sworn in. So that gives China what? About 2 years. So China's saying, maybe China says, let's move within the next 2 years when there's weak leadership in Washington. Let's take advantage of this golden opportunity. We may not see a leader this week again. Maybe in 2024, November 2024, a strong Republican candidate becomes president, gets elected, who takes a strong line against China, who believes in peace through strength. And then all of a sudden, 2026, 2027 doesn't look so good because it means we're going to have conflict with the U.S. Perhaps we could move on Taiwan now with minimal consequences militarily. Maybe we'll have a few naval battles with the U.S. Maybe we can get the U.S. to stand down. Maybe we can prevail in some of these naval battles in our backyard, in China's backyard. I'm just saying that someone predicts Philadelphia 0, Kansas City 0. Justin Ferris, come on, Justin. You know they go overtime. You got to have a winner. Super Bowl prediction. But I'm just saying that China, they may be changing their calculus. And even Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, has suggested as much. He said, considering what's happened in Russia and the world's attention clearly distracted by Russia, right? The world's attention is completely fixated on Russia-Ukraine. And if things blow up in the Middle East, no pun intended, the world's attention will be fixated there. China might say, considering those factors and weak leadership in Washington, let's move now. Let's move now. Perhaps they're not. Someone asked here, David Dan, a good question, David, as we move into our questions. China might say, we don't think that Biden is going to react in any kind of meaningful way. Yeah, there might be a naval battle, but the U.S. doesn't want a protracted war with China, especially this current leadership. Joe Biden, his administration, they're concerned with, as his predecessor Barack Obama, who he once served under, said, fundamentally transforming America domestically. That's their main concern. Folks, I live in the United States. I can tell you it's happening all around us. The fundamental transformation of the United States, and it ain't good. And that is their main agenda right now. Foreign policy to these folks is a distraction from the greater aim of, you could say, transforming, I could say, dismembering the United States, at least the culture, the traditions of this country. So China's weighing all of this. Let's get to questions and answers. We got 15 solid minutes. Keith Vanderpool, who I believe is a premium member, he is now banned from premium membership. Keith, you're picking the Chiefs? Just kidding. Just kidding. All are welcome, even Chiefs fans. And the thing is, I like the Chiefs. I really do. Andy Reid, former Eagles coach, and Mahomes is great. And I believe Mahomes is a Christian. I believe he is a Christian. He seems like a good guy. So like the Chiefs, just not on Super Bowl Sunday against the Eagles. Okay, questions here. Misael, maybe Mishael Ferreira. What are your views on what would be the hooks that drag Gog to Israel, as the book of Ezekiel, chapter 37, verse 4 states? I just heard someone yesterday saying it's going to be food insecurity. I don't know about that. I have honestly tended to think, and I discussed this at length with our friend Amir Sarfati of Behold Israel. Gosh, that was last March or April. Now it was a while ago. We had a great conversation about this. And Amir believes, and I tend to agree with him on this, that energy could be the hook in the jaw. Israel has become a natural gas powerhouse. We've documented this here in the newscast. They've discovered just loads of natural gas off the Mediterranean coast, off the coast of northern Israel. And Israel is now, and folks, people would have said this would never happen just a few years ago. And yet Israel is now a natural gas exporter, to the point that Israel and Europe signed a natural gas deal last summer where Israel will send natural gas to Europe. They send it through Egypt and then on to Europe. And why is that? Because Europe knows no longer, to any great degree, can it rely on Russia for its energy needs. And Europe, in such a short-sighted, foolish way, became so reliant on Russian energy. And now they're looking for alternatives, and they're looking to Israel. And you got to think that Russia's not too happy about that, right? Putin enjoys having an energy monopoly. Now, all of a sudden, Israel, and suppose Israel strikes more natural gas, and more and more democracies are saying, let's not do business with Russia. Let's get our natural gas from Israel. All of a sudden, that's taking business away from Russia. You do the math. Could something like that precipitate and be the hook in the jaw? There's a lot of scenarios there. It's a fascinating question, and thank you for it. But a lot of scenarios. What do you guys think of that? Comment on that. What do you think the hook in the jaw will be? I love the live streams because it's interactive and it's like we're having a conversation, right? It's cool. Mikey 10,000 says, I am wondering what will happen between Israel and Russia if Netanyahu and Putin fall out. Mikey, that's Mikey 10,000. That's the $10 million question. Bibi and Putin have had a good relationship over the past 24 years. What happens all of a sudden? I can tell you, if there is a falling out, it won't be anything that Bibi precipitates. That will be a Putin thing. It would be Putin shutting Bibi out. Because Bibi's going to continue to try to keep that relationship solid as he can keep it, despite a lot of external factors. That would be Vladimir Putin shutting things down and saying, Bibi, no more. We're not cool any longer, in a very undiplomatic way, I just said. In essence, that's what Putin would do. I think Putin would be the one to end the relationship, and then I think things get really dicey. Okay. Shalom, Eric, from Joy Christie. Joy from India. Hello, India. Wow, great to have you with us. I told you, all around the world we have people. It's just so great what God has done here. He's given us the ability through these live streams to reach every corner of the world. Love it. Welcome, Joy from India, and shalom to you. Do you feel in the 10 horns, India is also there? Now, Joy, I believe you're talking about at the end of days, which we are fast approaching. 10 horns, is it 10 nations? Some people believe it's 10 kind of geographic zones. If it's 10 nations, this is talked about in the book of Revelation. If it's 10 nations, I would lean towards Europe being the 10 horns, but certainly there's a few other factors here. Number one, India is the world's largest democracy. Perhaps those 10 nations are an alliance of democracies, of the world's major democracies. India could certainly be in that. Others have thought the 10 horns might be not exactly nation states, but the world being broken up into geographical zones. Certainly, India would be one of those horns. It's the second behind China, most populous nation. Is India number one or number two now? China and India are neck and neck when it comes to population. So certainly India, a major, major player, which, by the way, I mentioned it has good relations with Russia. The India-Israel relationship has really blossomed over the past few years. So we're praying great things for India, for sure. Joy, that's a great question. One more swig of the water here. Okay. And where I am from in Northeast Philadelphia, you heard me right. I called it water. The rest of the country calls it water. But for some reason in Philadelphia, we pronounce it water. So when I travel around the country and I ask for a glass of water, I get some very interesting stares and responses, to say the least. And usually, you're from Philadelphia, aren't you? Okay. Erick, Russia, Robbie, no last name. He says, Erick, Russia is having trouble fighting the Ukrainian army. Indeed, they are. Would they actually think they could beat Israel? Robbie, yes. A few things here. Three things to keep in mind. Number one, Russia's a nuclear power. And Israel is too, but Russia's got the world's largest nuclear arsenal. And they, as you can see from what's going on in Ukraine, they're using that to threaten the world. There's nuclear threats seemingly once a week at least, from Putin to Medvedev on down, various Russian officials. So there's a nuclear factor. Secondly, remember, Russia will be aligned with other nations when it comes against Israel. The Ezekiel invasion is several nations, Russia, Iran, and Turkey at the forefront of that coalition force, nations from North Africa, nations from Central Asia. So that's a broad alliance of many armies coming against Israel, not just Russia. Third, I know Russia has struggled in Ukraine big time, losing at least, get ready for this, 100,000 men in the past 11 months, according to various estimates. Now, Ukraine has lost many more. And I know Ukraine has taken massive, massive lumps in this war, no doubt, which brings me to my third point. Russia right now is very likely gearing up for a major spring offensive. It may not be April. It may be early March. Some people think it may fall around February 24th, which would mark the 1-year anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine. But make no mistake about it, Russia is certainly preparing for a big offensive. Land, air, sea, and Ukraine has resisted, valiantly over the past 11 months. But it's going to be tough to continue to stretch things out. We'll see, because Russia's going all in on this thing, folks. There's too much on the line for Putin. He's all in. If he loses here with his tail between his legs, he's done. He's deposed. He's done. He's out of leadership. There'll be a coup. There'll be new leadership there. He's done. He's done. He knows it. There's no turning back for him. He must have complete victory in Ukraine. Now, what does complete victory look like in Ukraine? Is it still conquering Kyiv and conquering much of Ukraine? Perhaps not. Perhaps he'll frame total victory now as, hey, we control eastern Ukraine, the eastern half of Ukraine. I don't know. But what I do know is there's another offensive coming. And if they're successful in that offensive, the Russian military, it's really going to boost their confidence, just getting back to the Israel factor. And look, if you're Russia, you're the largest landmass in the world, Russia, of any nation. Israel's the size of the state of New Jersey. So yes, when Russia looks at Israel, it's very confident. Okay, we've got a super chat here from Lucas. Thank you, Lucas, for the super chat, and thank you for tuning in. Many of my friends are not believers. A good amount of mine too, Lucas. He says, I can't mention end times without them thinking I'm crazy. Any tips to nudge them in the right direction? Lucas, I hear you. I've had these very conversations. I would say a few things. Number one, things are, I'm an optimistic, encouraging person. You hear me on the newscast, I never say, oh man, we're done. Because I know God sits on the throne, because I've given my life to the Lord Jesus. He's in control. I follow him. I know things are going to work out no matter how hairy it gets. But things are going to get worse before they get better. And your friends and others who are not believers, more and more are going to ask questions. What's going on? What does this all mean? Is there some deeper meaning here to all of these earth-shaking events? Certainly a lot of people were asking that during COVID. Certainly when Russia invaded Ukraine. That, Lucas, I believe, will open up witnessing opportunities for you, where you could say, well, as a matter of fact, here's what I believe. Here's what the Bible, for what it's worth, here's what you're talking to a non-believer. Here's what the Bible says about it. Boom. You have an opportunity right there to witness. In the meantime, I think with friends who aren't believers, maybe it's not always, you'll have to have discernment from the Holy Spirit, but maybe it's not always the best thing to start out your witnessing to them with the world's about to end and you're going to hell. Maybe it's telling them about Jesus first. And that works for some people. To be honest with you, when I got saved, it was kind of, I better get my act together. Whoa, that kind of thing. It was a fear factor. Everyone's different. You'll have to gauge that. The Holy Spirit will show you. He'll show you what to say. He'll put the words in your mouth and show you how to witness to them. But a good way to start before even getting to end times, and for many people like me, end times will bring them into the fold, into the body of Christ. That's how it worked for me. But for others, just try telling them about Jesus first. And you don't have to beat them over the head with the Bible. What you can do, first and foremost, Lucas, is be an ambassador for Christ. I've talked about this many times on the newscast. Live out your faith in the sight of others, especially in the sight of non-believers. Provoke them to jealousy. Make them think, man, something is different about Lucas. The world's on fire. Everything's going to hell in a handbasket. And this guy's got peace and a smile on his face, and he's happy and he's content and he's positive and he's encouraging. How do you do it, Lucas? There's your opportunity. Well, let me tell you about Jesus. This was my journey. This is how I came to this point. I became a Christian. I chose to follow Jesus. It changed everything, and you take it from there. So there's some hints for you there, Lucas. I hope that helped a little bit. But remember, the biggest thing I can tell you, Lucas, is you are an ambassador for Christ, meaning you can talk the talk all day long and talk at your friends. Don't fall into that trap. Before any talk, you need to live out your faith. You need to be Christ-like in their presence and in their view. And then you're off to a great start, because they're saying people are looking for authenticity. And people are looking, man, when it comes to Christians, professing Christians, you know, everyone watching, that the non-believing world is looking to sniff out a hypocrite constantly. Aha! I knew it. You Christians are all the same. You're a bunch of hypocrites. You preach this and then you do this in your private life. Don't be that person. Be as blameless as you can be. We're called to a different standard as followers of Jesus, as ambassadors for Christ. And it's a royal priesthood. And he will use you in ways you could never believe. And you, Lucas, may very well bring many of your friends, your non-believing friends, before it's all said and done, you may bring them into the fold to the point where the most unlikely people among your friend group may become the biggest voices professing Jesus. Fasten your seatbelt. You wait for that. Okay, last question here. Great questions. Great questions. I always say we have one of the most educated and just informed audiences on all of YouTube, I think. And that's a lot. Hey, 1 billion people using YouTube? Billions? Last question, and a good one to end with. Basil Khoury. Do you think America and European countries will come to Israel's defense against Russia if it helps Ukraine? Okay. Basil, I think what you're saying is if Russia came against Israel, would the U.S. and Europe aid Israel? I'm not going to give you my opinion on that. I'm going to give you what the Bible says. The book of Ezekiel, chapter 38, 39, the war of Gog and Magog, talks about this latter days confederation. I believe it'll be led by Russia against Israel. Many believe Turkey will lead it. But I believe Russia will be the main player there. And the Bible is very clear. Ezekiel, God speaking through Ezekiel, is very clear that Israel is on its own. It says some nations, probably the U.S. and Europe, probably the Saudis, the UAE, they protest. Maybe there's UN resolutions against Russia and against Iran, but they don't intervene. Seemingly, if the Bible is any indication, and it's the ultimate indicator, they don't intervene to help Israel. Israel's on its own, except for a very powerful ally, Yahweh, the God of Israel, who intervenes in a way in the affairs of men in a way that he hasn't in some 2,000 years. Fasten your seatbelts. I think that's a good way to end today's live stream. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Go Eagles. God bless you. And until tomorrow, never hold your peace.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.